A veteran, an auction, and a warning, wrapped in silence. The stale, paper-thin air inside the Silvercrest County Courthouse Annex pressed against Ethan Marlow like an old memory he never asked to revisit. The building smelled of wet wool coats, dust trapped behind ancient radiators, and the faint bitterness of burnt coffee left too long on a warmer. Ethan had smelled it all before, in waiting rooms, in barracks, in command tents where decisions were made before dawn. Only this time, he wasn't here for orders. He was here for escape. He sat alone on the last wooden bench, shadow stretched out at his feet like a silver-gray sentinel carved out of quiet vigilance. The Belgian Malinois never barked, never whined, never broke discipline. His muzzle, frosted with age, rested on Ethan's boot, amber eyes watching the room with the same cool analysis Ethan had spent a lifetime refining. To anyone else, Shadow looked like a calm, aging service dog. To Ethan, he was the last piece of the army he kept, loyal, precise, and impossibly perceptive. At the front of the room, the auctioneer droned through a list of seized vehicles and forgotten tools. Hands shot up, deals closed, murmurs rose and fell like a tide Ethan refused to wade into. He wasn't here for the used tractor or hunting cabin. He was waiting for one name, one ghost scattered across the county ledger. Ridgway Lodge. When the auctioneer finally cleared his throat and spoke the words Parcel 11C, known locally as the Ridgway Lodge, the atmosphere of the room changed instantly. It wasn't a sound, it was a collective tightening, a shift, a silent intake of breath. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the auctioneer's voice dropped half a register, as if he too felt the weight of something no one wanted to name. 160 acres, single lodge structure, condition, poor, water access unknown, 14 years of unpaid property taxes, opening bid, $500. No one moved, farmers in flannel, miners with steel-caked boots, real estate flippers sharpening pencils. They all stared ahead with an expression Ethan couldn't quite categorize. Pity, caution, maybe even fear. Ethan raised his hand. Shadow's ears flicked at the same moment, as if confirming the decision. 500, the auctioneer repeated, eyes shifting toward the back. 500. Do I hear 6? The quiet was suffocating. It wasn't the competitive silence from earlier bids. It was the silence of people refusing to get involved, the silence of people who knew more than they wanted to say. Going once, going twice. A rancher in the front row, a man with a face carved by wind, sun, and hard years, met Ethan's eyes and gave a small, troubled shake of his head, a warning from a stranger who didn't owe him one. Sold, the gavel cracked, sharp as a rifle shot. To the gentleman in the back, $500. Whispers broke loose instantly. Not loud, but sharp. Ethan caught fragments as he walked up to the desk. Poor bastard. He doesn't know what's up there. They should have told him. Ridgway never left that land. The clerk handling the paperwork kept her eyes glued to the forms, sliding the deed toward him like a contamination risk. Her hands shook. She didn't look up. She didn't say congratulations. She didn't say anything. Ethan slipped the deed into his jacket pocket. It felt heavier than paper should. Outside, the Wyoming air hit him like a clean blade, cold, alpine sharp, smelling of pine and distant storms. Shadow stretched, shook out his coat, and waited with the patience of a creature who trusted his human more than he trusted the ground beneath his paws. On the main street, the chipped sign of Feldman's General Store swung in the wind. Ethan went inside for supplies, lamp oil, an axe handle, a padlock, coffee, but the shopkeeper, an old man with kind eyes and a nervous jaw, leaned in with the weight of a man who had kept a dangerous secret too long. You're the one who bought Ridgway Lodge. Ethan nodded. I am. The man swallowed. Then you deserve to know. The last owner didn't run off, didn't sell, didn't die of exposure. Ethan raised a brow. Then what happened? He disappeared, left his jacket, left his truck, left a half-full mug of coffee on the table. "And the town?" Ethan asked. "Town learned not to ask," Feldman whispered. "Not after Titanor started sniffing around. Not after Ridgway started poking at things he wasn't supposed to uncover." The old man exhaled a shaky breath. "That land, it's not cursed, it's claimed." Ethan thanked him, paid cash, and stepped outside. The wind cut sharper now. The horizon darkened with a storm building in the distance. Shadow pressed against his leg, not anxious but alert, a soldier ready for orders. Ethan looked down the long dirt road toward the mountains. He had come here to escape the ghosts of war, but it seemed he had just bought someone else's ghosts, and something told him these ghosts weren't dead. They were waiting. The lodge, the trail, and the first sign that someone didn't want visitors. The drive toward Ridgway Lodge began like any other mountain road, winding, narrow, and framed by endless pines. But the farther Ethan and Shadow traveled from Silvercrest town, the more the road changed. Asphalt thinned into gravel. Gravel dissolved into dirt. Dirt devolved into little more than 2 deep ruts carved into a path no one had maintained in over a decade. The world grew quieter, colder, wilder. Shadow, usually calm on rides, shifted his weight with unusual tension. His ears perked, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the evolving scents of the deep wilderness. Ethan trusted that nose more than he trusted half the humans he'd served with. Shadow didn't react to scenery. He reacted to intentions, to disturbances, to danger. At the half-hour mark, the first obstacle appeared. A massive pine tree lay across the trail, too large to be moved without machinery. At first glance, it looked like a natural fall, the bark old, the branches broken. But Ethan's trained eyes caught the truth immediately. The tree was angled wrong, too deliberate, and the base wasn't splintered by lightning. It had been cut clean through, chainsaw smooth beneath the snow crust. Someone didn't want vehicles going past that point. He maneuvered the truck around it slowly, wheels sliding dangerously close to a ditch that also looked suspiciously too clean, too steep. Not erosion, excavation. A trench dug to trap axles and discourage curiosity. Ethan kept driving. Another mile in, a boulder blocked most of the path. It sat awkwardly on a slight incline, its resting angle unnatural. Someone rolled it there, and not recently, but not 14 years ago either. The moss pattern was wrong. Recent hands had touched it. Shadow growled low in his throat, staring at the boulder long after the truck passed. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "This isn't nature," he murmured. "This is someone's idea of fencing." As the terrain grew rougher, the sky darkened with looming storm clouds. Gusts of icy wind cut across the mountains, carrying the scent of snow ready to fall. Silvercrest storms came fast, and they came hard. If Ethan didn't reach the lodge soon, he'd be snowed in before even getting to shelter. 2 rotting fence posts marked the turnoff to the property. The wire between them had snapped long ago. The entrance looked abandoned, neglected, but Ethan felt the truth in his bones. The neglect was intentional. Isolation was the goal. The trail wound through pines that grew so close their branches clawed at the truck like skeletal fingers. Snow began to fall lightly, dusting the windshield, transforming the forest into a pale maze. After another 10 minutes of slow, careful driving, the trees abruptly thinned. The clearing opened like a breath held too long. And there it was, Ridgway Lodge, a small log structure hunched beneath the weight of a collapsing roof, its dark logs scarred by time. A sagging porch leaned to one side, the railing snapped and hanging by a single nail. The windows were streaked with grime, opaque like blind eyes staring back at him. A stone chimney rose from the lodge, engulfed in moss. The whole place radiated abandonment, but not emptiness. Ethan killed the engine. The sudden silence pulsed like a living thing. No birdsong, no rustling branches, just the whisper of wind threading through the pines. Shadow stepped out first, nose high, body tense. He never bristled for no reason. Ethan approached the porch. The boards creaked under his boots, but not from decay alone. They felt disturbed, as if someone had walked across them recently, trying to disguise their tracks under the blanket of snow. Inside, the lodge greeted them with a cold, stale breath. The single room was dim, dust hanging like a suspended fog in the narrow shafts of light forcing their way through filthy windows. A wooden table stood in the center, with 2 chairs pushed out as if someone stood up quickly. A cast-iron bed frame sagged in the corner. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling, but the dust patterns told a different story. This lodge was occupied far more recently than the town believed. A mug sat on the table, a simple ceramic cup with a faded navy ring around the rim. Inside, coffee residue clung to the bottom, old but not 14 years old. A coat still hung by the door, a heavy winter jacket with a cracked zipper and a rip along the sleeve. The inside pockets still bulged, as if someone left in a hurry and assumed they'd be right back. But the detail that froze Ethan in place wasn't the mug or the coat. It was the book. A paperback lay face down on the table, its spine cracked, its pages folded slightly as if the reader had stepped away for a moment, planning to return. Daniel Ridgway didn't leave willingly. Shadow walked the perimeter of the room with slow, deliberate steps, sniffing each corner. His tail was stiff, his posture alert. When he reached the stone fireplace, he stopped abruptly. Then everything changed. Shadow's body tensed like a bowstring drawn too tight. His hackles rose, his ears flattened. A low, distressed whine escaped his chest. Not fear, not aggression, but deep, instinctive alarm. Ethan's pulse quickened. "What is it, boy?" Shadow ignored him. He approached the fireplace with cautious steps, sniffing intensely at the base stones. He pawed at one specific slab, a rectangular stone smoother than the rest. His paw scraped desperately, persistently, as if trying to dig something out. Ethan knelt beside him, running his hand along the stone. It wasn't anchored like the others. Its mortar was wrong. Rubbery. Darker. Artificial. A seal, not a bond. Shadow whined louder, circling the fireplace with mounting anxiety. Ethan stared at the stone, at his dog, at the quiet lodge full of unfinished stories and warnings carved into silence. He didn't know what lay beneath that stone, but Shadow did, and Shadow had never been wrong. Not once. Not ever. Whatever was hidden here, someone didn't want it found. And for the first time, Ethan felt the cold realization coil in his gut. He wasn't alone on this mountain. He was trespassing in a place someone fought very hard to keep buried. The blizzard, the hearthstone, and the secret chamber beneath the lodge. The storm rolled in faster than Ethan expected. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened into a suffocating slate-gray dome. Snowflakes, heavy and wet, drifted lazily at first before gathering speed and aggression, slashing sideways as the winds strengthened. The mountains swallowed the daylight early, leaving the forest drenched in ghostly twilight. Inside the lodge, the world felt smaller, tighter, as if the storm pressed against the walls trying to squeeze its way inside. Ethan sealed the door against the wind and lit a small fire in the fireplace. The flames fought weakly at first, then grew into a soft, crackling warmth that pushed back the cold creeping across the floorboards. But the fire didn't calm Shadow. If anything, it made things worse. He paced in tight circles in front of the hearth, claws clicking against the old wood, breath coming in fast bursts that fogged the air. His muscles were wound tight, flanks trembling. Every few seconds he stopped abruptly to stare at the same spot, the smooth rectangular slab at the center of the hearth's base. Ethan watched him with growing unease. "Shadow, what are you sensing?" The dog didn't respond, didn't even twitch. He sniffed the stone again, this time lowering his weight toward it, almost bowing, before lifting his paw and scratching with frantic urgency. The sound was sharp and grating, claws against slate, but Shadow didn't stop. His whining grew louder, raw, as if pleading. Ethan knelt beside him and pressed his hand to the stone. It was colder than the others. Too cold, as if the slab had not absorbed any heat from the fire burning just above it. That, alone, was wrong. He examined the edges and saw what Shadow had sensed instantly. The mortar wasn't true mortar. It was darker, smoother, almost rubberized, and cracked strangely when Ethan scraped it with the tip of his knife. This wasn't a structural stone. This was a lid, a hidden door. Ethan's pulse quickened, a familiar adrenaline whisper in his veins, the same one he used to feel before finding buried weapons caches overseas. Shadow sensed the shift and moved beside him, tail stiff, body angled protectively toward Ethan. "You found something big, didn't you?" Ethan murmured. Shadow's ears perked, his anxiety turning into a different kind of tension, anticipation. Outside, the blizzard howled against the walls, rattling the glass panes like skeletal fingers tapping for entry. Snow hammered the roof in a relentless rhythm. They were trapped in a storm, and yet something beneath them demanded attention. The timing was no coincidence. Ethan could feel that now. He retrieved his crowbar from his gear, positioning its edge into the thin seam Shadow had exposed. The stone resisted at first, unmoving, sealed by a decade of built-up grime and hardened pitch. He repositioned, braced his boots, applied force. The slab budged, barely, sending a vibration through the floorboards. Shadow barked once, a sharp sound of urgency. "All right," Ethan muttered, sweat building despite the cold. "Let's do this." He pressed harder, using every ounce of strength. The seal cracked with a muffled pop, releasing a thin wisp of dust and cold air from below. A smell drifted upward, old earth, dry stone, and something metallic, almost medicinal. He worked the crowbar around the edges, prying, lifting, grunting as the stone slowly loosened from its false setting. Finally, the slab slid free and dropped onto the wooden floor with a heavy, resonant boom. Shadow stopped pacing immediately. He stared into the opening with sharp, focused eyes, his breath silent and steady now. His tail lowered, his body calm but alert. The anxiety vanished. The mission, whatever it was, had become clear to him. Ethan held the lantern over the dark rectangular pit. What he saw shouldn't have existed beneath a simple mountain lodge. The cavity was a small man-made chamber, about 4 feet deep, lined with stone. Bone, dry, carefully constructed, hidden with meticulous intent. Someone had carved this into the earth, secretly, expertly. Inside the chamber, a military-grade green metal box, the kind designed to withstand war, weather, and sabotage. A stack of leather-bound notebooks, tied together with fraying twine, their edges yellowed but preserved. A smaller rusted tin container filled with old keys and tags. Ethan's stomach tightened. This was a cache. This was intentional. This was something someone died to protect. He lifted the notebooks first. The leather was stiff with age but not ruined. The top journal had a name written inside the cover in neat handwriting. Daniel Ridgway. June 2008. Shadow stood perfectly still, his gaze locked onto the notebooks, then the box, then Ethan, as if his job was done, as if he had led Ethan to the truth and needed no thanks. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's head. "Good boy," he whispered. "You saved us again." The wind screamed louder outside, a demonic wail that rattled the chimney and forced smoke back into the room. The storm was now a wall, sealing them in. Ethan knew he would be spending the night here, with only the fire and the secrets under the floor to keep him company. He lifted the metal box. It was heavy. Too heavy for just documents, and whatever clinked inside sounded like glass. Shadow's eyes followed every movement. Snow hammered the lodge harder. Ethan felt something shift in the air, a sensation he couldn't name. Not fear, not excitement. Something heavier. The realization hit him slowly, sinking into his gut. This wasn't an abandoned property. This was a crime scene, a sealed confession, a buried war someone fought alone and lost. And now that Ethan had found it, someone would come looking. The sheriff, the threat, and the first attempt on Ethan's life. The storm had turned the world into a white coffin by the time night fell. Snow pounded the roof so violently it sounded like fists hammering from above. The wind screamed through every crack in the walls, making the cabin moan and shudder as if alive. The fire burned low, fighting a losing battle against the cold that seeped from the floorboards. Ethan sat at the wooden table, the leather-bound journal spread out before him, shadow curled tightly at his feet. Each page of Daniel Ridgway's handwriting felt heavier than ink. Notes of harassment, coded warnings, chemical sample results, threats disguised as official notices, it all formed a picture Ethan recognized too well. This wasn't coincidence. This was pressure. This was targeted suppression. In the military, there were words for it: civic intimidation, soft elimination, institutional erasure. Daniel Ridgway had been hunted long before he vanished. Ethan's eyes drifted to the metal box. He hadn't opened it yet. The weight inside suggested glass, maybe vials. Evidence, proof, enough to destroy careers or corporations, enough to make someone kill. Shadow lifted his head suddenly, ears twitching. His muscles tightened beneath Ethan's hand. A low rumble erupted from his chest, a warning, deep and primal. Ethan froze, listening. At first, he thought the howl outside was just the wind shifting. Then he heard it. An engine. Faint, but growing louder, pushing through the storm with mechanical aggression. No one should be driving up here. Not in this weather. Not on this trail. Shadow's growl intensified, vibrating against Ethan's leg. "Easy," Ethan whispered, though his voice carried none of the calm his words pretended. "Stay close." Headlights cut through the blizzard. A large, dark shape crawled into the clearing. A county-issued SUV, its silhouette unmistakable even through the swirling whiteout. The vehicle parked directly in front of the lodge. The headlights shut off, leaving the world darker than before. A heavy car door opened. Boots crunched through deep snow. A fist pounded on the cabin door, loud, forceful, intentional. Shadow launched to his feet, hackles raised, growl rising to a dangerous pitch. Ethan moved to the door like a man stalking a bomb. His training returned effortlessly. Slow breaths, steady hands, controlled movements. He slid the lock aside and cracked the door open no more than 2 inches. A gust of icy wind blasted in. Sheriff Harlan Briggs filled the gap. Large, thick-necked, mid-50s, a face chiseled by too many winters and too many secrets. Snow clung to the brim of his hat and the shoulders of his county-issued winter coat, but his eyes, small, dark, predatory, were not cold at all. They were calculating. "Well," Briggs boomed, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "hell of a storm to be moving in, Mr. Marlow." Ethan didn't return the smile. "Sheriff, mind if I step in? Just want to make sure you're not freezing to death in this old relic." He didn't wait for permission. He pushed the door fully open and walked inside. Shadow snarled, teeth bared, body straightening into attack posture. The sheriff instinctively stepped back. "Easy there, boy," Briggs muttered, raising his hands half-heartedly. "That's a temper you got on him." "He's a good judge of character," Ethan said. Briggs's jaw tightened for the briefest second. The sheriff didn't look at Ethan when he replied. He looked at the fireplace, the table, the floor where snow had melted off Ethan's boots. He scanned the room with the precision of a man who had done this before. Not a welfare check. A search. "So," Briggs began casually, pacing near the hearth, "finding everything all right out here? Cabin's in rough shape. Place has history." Shadow followed him, every muscle taut, shadowing his every step like an avenging spirit. Ethan watched carefully. "It's what I paid for." Briggs chuckled, a short, dry sound. "Some people say this land's unlucky. Stories about old Ridgway. You know, the journalist before you." "I heard," Ethan said. "I'm sure you did." Briggs's voice flattened. He stepped closer to the hearth. Too close. "Cabin ever strike you as strange?" Briggs asked lightly, but the weight beneath the question was unmistakable. "Anything unusual? Anything interesting tucked away?" He tapped his boot on the floor directly over the secret chamber. Ethan didn't react. "Just dust," he said, "and cold." Briggs's lips twitched in irritation. Outside, the wind roared louder, as if echoing the rising tension. "Well," Briggs exhaled, stepping back, "storm's only getting worse. Roads'll be buried soon. Just wanted to check you weren't struggling." His smile sharpened. "After all, accidents happen out here." Ethan stared at him without blinking. "Thanks for the concern." Briggs nodded and stepped toward the door. Before leaving, he paused, hand on the frame. "Word of advice," he said without turning around. "Don't go poking around this lodge too much. Folks around here respect boundaries. Best you do the same." He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The moment his footsteps faded, Ethan bolted the door and moved to the window. He watched Briggs trudge through the storm, get into his SUV, and disappear down the path. Shadow was already at the back of the cabin. Growling. Ethan grabbed a lantern and his coat and stepped outside. Snow lashed his face, stinging like needles. His boots sank nearly a foot with each step. He circled the truck, brushing snow from the tires. 3 were untouched. The 4th, the driver's rear tire, wasn't. A precise knife puncture, deep and clean. Not a tear from the road. Not a rock. Not an accident. A warning. A message. Ethan stood motionless despite the storm clawing at him. The blizzard howled around him, but inside him a cold clarity settled like steel. Sheriff Briggs didn't come to check on him. Sheriff Briggs came to mark him, to see what he knew, to warn him away, to show him how easily he could be isolated, or eliminated. Ethan brushed the snow from his coat and walked back to the lodge, Shadow close behind him, tail stiff, body coiled. Inside, Ethan bolted the door again, leaned his back against the wood, and exhaled slowly. Shadow rested against his leg, eyes still burning with instinctive certainty. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. Someone knew the secret hidden beneath the hearth. Someone had been guarding it for years. And now they knew Ethan had breached the silence. Shadow lifted his head and let out a single low growl, a promise of danger yet to come. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's shoulder. "We're in it now," he whispered. And outside the storm roared as if to confirm it. The friend, the deadline, and the decision that guarantees war. The storm did not ease. By dawn it had grown into a monstrous wall of white, a blizzard so dense the trees barely existed as silhouettes. The lodge groaned under the weight of the snow piling onto its roof. Wind screeched around the cabin like a trapped spirit, forcing icy drafts through every tiny crack between the logs. It was the kind of storm that erased footprints, trails, and evidence, the kind that devoured sound and distance, the kind men disappeared in. Ethan knew exactly why someone chose this night to make their move. Storms hide crimes. He had seen it in other countries, on other terrains, where danger used weather as an accomplice. Shadow had slept in broken intervals, ears twitching at every shift of wind. The dog's thick fur had puffed defensively through the night, his instincts wired tight. When Ethan moved to gather the documents at dawn, Shadow stood immediately, as if sensing the next step. The journals were spread across the table, Daniel Ridgway's handwriting jagged from cold nights, shaky from fear, steady from determination. Ethan skimmed page after page again, reinforcing details in his mind. Toxic waste dumping, illegal operations, a map that pointed directly beneath the lodge. Then Ethan finally opened the military-grade metal box. Inside were 6 water vials, labeled with dates and chemical notations, 3 soil samples in sealed evidence bags, a handful of metallic foil packets used for industrial contamination testing, a flash drive taped to the lid, and a neatly folded letter, sealed in plastic to protect it from moisture. The letter was addressed to whoever finds this, if I do not make it back. Daniel Ridgway had known exactly how dangerous the truth was. Ethan pressed his hands to the table, bowing his head for a moment, the weight of responsibility settling on him like the storm outside. Shadow sat beside him, silent, watching. If Ethan stayed quiet, Sheriff Briggs and whoever worked with him would eventually assume Ethan was clueless. They would back off. He could leave Silvercrest, leave the lodge, leave the danger behind. But Daniel Ridgway didn't leave anything behind willingly, and neither would Ethan. He pulled a burner phone from his pack, a military habit he never abandoned, and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang once, twice. A groggy voice answered, grainy with sleep and suspicion. "Who the hell?" "Logan, it's Marlow." The line went quiet, then a low exhale. "Ethan, I thought you vanished." "Almost," Ethan said dryly. "I need your help." Logan Pierce, former Army intelligence, now an investigative journalist who specialized in corporate corruption, woke up fast. Ethan could hear the bed creak, the clatter of a lamp switch, the rustle of papers. "Talk to me," Logan said. Ethan explained everything: the lodge, the journals, the evidence, the sheriff, the punctured tire, the feeling of being watched. Logan listened silently, only interrupting once. "You're telling me Ridgway wasn't just missing, he was erased." "Yes," Ethan said, "and they want the same from me." There was a long pause on the line. "Okay," Logan muttered. "Send me everything. Photos of the journals, scans of the samples, notes. I'll start digging into Titan ore." "It's too risky to send digitally," Ethan said. "The area's monitored. I have to deliver. That storm will bury you alive." Ethan looked at Shadow, who stared back with unshakable certainty. "I've seen worse," Ethan replied. "All right," Logan said, tension thickening his voice. "Then we do this old school. Listen carefully, Ethan." He spoke slowly, intentionally. "You will contact me again at exactly 5 a.m. tomorrow. If you don't call, if you miss that window, I go to the FBI with everything. Every scrap, every page, every vial, every photo. You understand?" Ethan nodded, even though Logan couldn't see him. "That's the deal," Ethan said. "If something happens to me, the truth still gets out." "That's not what I meant," Logan snapped. "I'm not losing another friend to a corporation that thinks it's God." Ethan hesitated. For the first time since arriving at Ridgway Lodge, something inside him wavered. Not fear, but recognition. He wasn't just stepping into danger. He was walking into a war Daniel Ridgway died trying to fight. "I'll check in at 5, Ethan said finally. "And Logan, this stays between us." "You know me," Logan replied. "I don't trust anyone except people who've bled for me." Ethan ended the call. He spent the next hour scanning journal pages in the small portable scanner he carried for field reports, connecting it to a solar charger he kept in his truck. He saved everything onto 2 flash drives, one for Logan, one as backup. Shadow watched him pack with quiet focus, tail still, eyes tracking every movement. The dog knew what this meant. Ethan layered his gear: thermal shirts, tactical vest, insulated jacket, weapon holster, knife sheath, snow gaiters. He packed rations, extra ammo, rope, waterproof bags, the evidence, and the burner phone. The storm outside continued its assault, wind screaming against the shutters like something feral. Ethan closed his pack and exhaled long and slow. "Tonight," he whispered, "they're coming." Shadow walked toward the door and sat, waiting, as if he understood that every preparation Ethan made was really for one purpose: to survive the night, to survive long enough for Logan to expose the truth. Ethan knelt beside Shadow and rested his forehead against the dog's, feeling the warmth beneath the fur. "We've been through worse, boy," he murmured, "but this time, we're fighting for someone who didn't make it home." Shadow's breath puffed softly, steady and sure. Ethan stood and latched the windows, reinforced the door with furniture, and positioned weapons strategically around the lodge, old habits resurfacing with military precision. He checked his watch. About 12 hours until his check-in deadline. 12 hours of storm, 12 hours of darkness, 12 hours before Titanor realized their window was closing. Tonight would decide everything, whether he delivered the evidence or whether he, like Daniel Ridgway, vanished into the cold. And the storm raged louder, as if heralding the battle that was coming. The silent woods, the watchers, and the first signs of the kill team. By late afternoon, the storm had transformed the mountains into a pale, shifting landscape of ghosts. Snow no longer fell gently, it swirled in violent spirals, devouring the horizon and swallowing sound. The forest around Ridgway Lodge stretched outward in all directions, empty and silent, like a great white sea with no boundaries. And in that silence, danger moved. Ethan spent hours fortifying the lodge. He reinforced the windows with planks scavenged from the shed, wedged furniture against the main door, and loaded each of his rifles with methodical precision. The wood groaned under shifting temperatures, the wind howled in the chimney like a mourning voice, and the fire flickered low, unable to fully fight the cold. Shadow remained alert the entire time, not pacing, not anxious, but listening. Every few minutes his head jerked toward the window. His ears twitched. His chest rumbled with a low warning growl that vibrated through the floorboards. Ethan finally knelt beside him. "What do you sense?" Shadow didn't look at him, only kept his gaze fixed on the forest outside. The dog heard something Ethan couldn't. That was enough. He grabbed his binoculars and moved to the narrow slit he had carved in the planked window. Snow blasted against the outside wood so hard it shook the frame. Ethan adjusted the lens and scanned the tree line, sweeping slowly from left to right. For a while, he saw only endless white. Then, a glint, a single metallic flash like the reflection of a cold star, too controlled, too sharp, not nature. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Someone was watching, someone with optics. He followed the angle. There, a shape behind a pine, too square to be a branch, too still to be an animal. He lowered the binoculars. "They're here," he whispered. Shadow let out a low, deep growl, confirming what Ethan already knew. The first scouts had arrived. Most people believed assassins or mercenaries approached targets with fast, dramatic aggression. That was nonsense. Professionals came like shadows, silent, methodical, patient. They observed before they struck. They mapped the terrain. They studied the weaknesses. Titanor would not send amateurs. If they were here, they would probe first, then wait, then strike. Ethan remembered the file Logan once showed him during an old investigation. Titanor's private enforcement division, the security team that handled whistleblowers, trespassers, and inconvenient witnesses. Men recruited from overseas contracting firms. Men who trained in mountains like these. Men who killed. He checked his watch. 4:17 p.m. Night would fall early in this storm. Darkness would give the strike team natural cover. Ethan walked to the back door and checked the lock. The wind beat so fiercely on the boards outside that snow leaked through the seams like powdered glass. The storm was their ally, but also his. Anything moving out there would leave no tracks. Anything killed out there would never be found. Shadow suddenly stiffened, body hard as stone. Then Ethan heard it too, a faint crunch of snow, far off but distinct. Someone stepped on a patch crusted with ice, unable to silence it completely. One man, then another, another. Ethan extinguished the lantern, plunging the room into a dim orange glow from the fireplace. Shadow melted into darkness beside him, invisible but alert. Ethan moved to the window slit again and saw it clearly this time. A second glint, then a third. 3 watchers, maybe more. The storm outside continued its assault, wind screaming against the shutters like something feral. Ethan closed his pack and exhaled long and slow. "Tonight," he whispered, "they're coming." Shadow walked toward the door and sat, waiting, as if he understood that every preparation Ethan made was really for one purpose: to survive the night, to survive long enough for Logan to expose the truth. Ethan knelt beside Shadow and rested his forehead against the dog's, feeling the warmth beneath the fur. "We've been through worse, boy," he murmured, "but this time, we're fighting for someone who didn't make it home." Shadow's breath puffed softly, steady and sure. Ethan stood and latched the windows, reinforced the door with furniture, and positioned weapons strategically around the lodge, old habits resurfacing with military precision. He checked his watch. About 12 hours until his check-in deadline. 12 hours of storm, 12 hours of darkness, 12 hours before Titanor realized their window was closing. Tonight would decide everything, whether he delivered the evidence or whether he, like Daniel Ridgway, vanished into the cold. And the storm raged louder, as if heralding the battle that was coming. The silent woods, the watchers, and the first signs of the kill team. By late afternoon, the storm had transformed the mountains into a pale, shifting landscape of ghosts. Snow no longer fell gently, it swirled in violent spirals, devouring the horizon and swallowing sound. The forest around Ridgway Lodge stretched outward in all directions, empty and silent, like a great white sea with no boundaries. And in that silence, danger moved. Ethan spent hours fortifying the lodge. He reinforced the windows with planks scavenged from the shed, wedged furniture against the main door, and loaded each of his rifles with methodical precision. The wood groaned under shifting temperatures, the wind howled in the chimney like a mourning voice, and the fire flickered low, unable to fully fight the cold. Shadow remained alert the entire time, not pacing, not anxious, but listening. Every few minutes his head jerked toward the window. His ears twitched. His chest rumbled with a low warning growl that vibrated through the floorboards. Ethan finally knelt beside him. "What do you sense?" Shadow didn't look at him, only kept his gaze fixed on the forest outside. The dog heard something Ethan couldn't. That was enough. He grabbed his binoculars and moved to the narrow slit he had carved in the planked window. Snow blasted against the outside wood so hard it shook the frame. Ethan adjusted the lens and scanned the tree line, sweeping slowly from left to right. For a while, he saw only endless white. Then, a glint, a single metallic flash like the reflection of a cold star, too controlled, too sharp, not nature. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Someone was watching, someone with optics. He followed the angle. There, a shape behind a pine, too square to be a branch, too still to be an animal. He lowered the binoculars. "They're here," he whispered. Shadow let out a low, deep growl, confirming what Ethan already knew. The first scouts had arrived. Most people believed assassins or mercenaries approached targets with fast, dramatic aggression. That was nonsense. Professionals came like shadows, silent, methodical, patient. They observed before they struck. They mapped the terrain. They studied the weaknesses. Titanor would not send amateurs. If they were here, they would probe first, then wait, then strike. Ethan remembered the file Logan once showed him during an old investigation. Titanor's Private Enforcement Division, the security team that handled whistleblowers, trespassers, and inconvenient witnesses. Men recruited from overseas contracting firms. Men who trained in mountains like these. Men who killed. He checked his watch. 4:17 p.m. Night would fall early in this storm. Darkness would give the strike team natural cover. Ethan walked to the back door and checked the lock. The wind beat so fiercely on the boards outside that snow leaked through the seams like powdered glass. The storm was their ally, but also his. Anything moving out there would leave no tracks. Anything killed out there would never be found. Shadow suddenly stiffened, body hard as stone. Then Ethan heard it too, a faint crunch of snow, far off but distinct. Someone stepped on a patch crusted with ice, unable to silence it completely. One man, then another, another. Ethan extinguished the lantern, plunging the room into a dim orange glow from the fireplace. Shadow melted into darkness beside him, invisible but alert. Ethan moved to the window slit again and saw it clearly this time. A second glint, then a third. 3 watchers, maybe more. Ethan grabbed the flaming bottle with gloved hands and threw it back out the window, but the fire had already spread. Another bottle crashed through the opposite side of the cabin, igniting the curtains with a roar. Shadow barked sharply, not fear, but urgency. "Move!" Ethan shouted. He grabbed his pack, slinging it over his shoulder. Smoke poured into the room, thick and black. The fire consumed the aged wood like it had been waiting years for this moment. The heat grew so intense the air shimmered. A third firebomb burst through the roof, raining flames like liquid gold. The lodge was becoming a furnace. Ethan pressed a wet cloth over his mouth and crouched low, dragging Shadow by the collar as they maneuvered toward the back door. Flames raced along the ceiling. The heat battered their skin. Smoke stung their eyes. The kill team wasn't trying to scare him. They weren't trying to flush him out. They were trying to erase him. He slammed his shoulder into the back door, bursting it open. A wall of ice-cold wind hit them, clearing the smoke from Ethan's lungs. Snow blasted against his face, instantly freezing the sweat beading on his forehead. Behind him, the lodge roared with fire, flames clawing at the doorway like living beasts unwilling to let their prey go. Ethan dragged Shadow into the storm, coughing hard, gripping the evidence pack to his chest. From the tree line, dark silhouettes emerged. 3, 4, maybe 6 men, moving with lethal purpose. In front of them stood a larger figure, broad-shouldered, face covered by a tactical mask, voice unmistakably professional when he spoke. "Marlow! You're done. Drop the bag." Ethan raised his weapon. Shadow growled low, positioning himself between Ethan and the kill team, ready to fight to the death. The storm howled. The flames shrieked. The snow swirled like madness around them. Ethan wiped ash from his eyes and whispered, "We're not done yet." And the night war finally began. The siege in the snow, Ethan and Shadow's last stand, begins. The world outside the burning lodge no longer looked real. The sky was a swirling bruise of smoke and snow. The lodge behind Ethan was a collapsing inferno, sending sparks into the blizzard like fiery insects fleeing death. Shadow stood pressed against Ethan's leg, his body rigid, chest rumbling with a deep, primal growl. His silver coat glowed orange from the flames, then ghosted back into blue-gray as the snow swallowed the light. Ahead, shapes emerged, dark, disciplined silhouettes forming a semicircle. Not amateurs, not panicked thugs. These men moved with the precision of trained operators, rifles raised, stance low, breathing controlled. And at the center was the largest one, his tactical mask dusted with snow, his voice deep and cold. "You can't outrun this, Marlow. Drop the pack." Ethan tightened his grip on the rifle. Shadow's growl sharpened. The storm's wind screamed past Ethan's ears, but beneath it he could still hear the steady crunch of boots, the rhythm of men closing in from the flanks. They were forming a kill box. In the swirling chaos, Ethan's mind sharpened into clarity. 6 men? No. 8. Maybe more. 1 leader in the center, 2 on the left flank, 3 on the right, 1 circling through the trees, 1 missing. The missing one chilled him. A trained killer not visible was the most dangerous threat of all. The leader spoke again, voice muffled by the storm. Last chance. Ethan lowered his stance slightly, looking at the snow, at the wind, at the angles. He wasn't planning to surrender. He was calculating. Shadow sensed it, the shift in Ethan's breathing, the tension in his shoulders. The dog leaned forward, ears pinned, ready to launch. Ethan whispered without looking down, "When I move, stay on my left." Shadow didn't respond in noise. He responded in posture, tail lowered, weight forward, muscles tight. The wind surged. A wall of snow blasted through the trees, enveloping the world. And Ethan made his move. The first shot. He dropped onto one knee, using the snow as camouflage as he fired the first shot, a clean, controlled burst toward the right flank. One of the silhouettes dropped instantly, collapsing into the snow with a muffled cry. Before the others could respond, Ethan rolled left, grabbing Shadow's collar and pulling him out of the line of fire. Bullets sliced through the air, snapping branches and kicking up clouds of snow inches from his head. The cold air screamed past his face. Shadow leapt ahead, teeth bared, charging the second man on the right flank. The man tried to pivot his weapon toward the dog, but Shadow hit him like a missile. 90 pounds of muscle and fury slammed into the man's chest, knocking him flat. Ethan didn't have time to see more. Shots were coming from multiple angles. A bullet grazed his shoulder. Another slammed into the snow beside his knee. He sprinted toward a fallen tree, diving behind it as gunfire carved into the trunk. The leader roared, "Move in! Take the dog first!" That sentence lit something inside Ethan that felt like fire. Shadow wasn't a dog. He was his partner, his family, his lifeline. Anyone who aimed for Shadow had already signed their death sentence. Shadow's fight. Shadow held the man on the ground, jaws locked on the attacker's wrist. The man screamed, his glove filling with blood. A second attacker rushed toward Shadow from behind, raising a knife. Ethan didn't think, he moved on instinct. He fired. The second attacker dropped before he even reached Shadow. Snow erupted around them as bullets tore through the air. Ethan spun, firing at the movement to his left, a man diving behind a tree. Another sprinting through the storm, shapes flickering in and out of the white void. The attackers were trained, but they weren't used to fighting in a blizzard with visibility reduced to inches. Ethan was. He had fought in deserts, mountains, jungles, places where the land itself tried to kill you long before the enemy did. He could feel the snow patterns, the shifts in wind, the weight of silence between gunshots. Shadow returned to his side, panting hard but uninjured, his muzzle stained with blood. "Good boy," Ethan whispered, loading another round. "Stay close." The kill box collapses. The leader realized the attack was faltering. Ethan heard his voice slicing through the storm. "Flare up! Light it!" One of the attackers pulled a flare from his vest and struck it, a burst of bright red fire cutting through the whiteout. It illuminated Ethan instantly, a glowing target in the storm. Gunfire erupted. Ethan grabbed Shadow and threw both of them sideways into a drift as bullets ripped through where they had stood a heartbeat earlier. Snow exploded into the air. Ethan's ears rang. Shadow barked fiercely, shaking off the snow. Ethan lifted his head just enough to see through the swirling white. The leader himself was charging now, weapon raised, trying to flank Ethan from the side. The flare glowed behind him like a rising demon. Ethan lined up the shot, exhaled, click, empty. His rifle was dry. The leader realized it at the same moment. A slow, triumphant smile spread across the man's face as he raised his weapon fully. Shadow lunged, but the leader was too far, 10 meters away. Ethan reached for his knife, too slow. A gunshot cracked through the storm. But it didn't come from Ethan, or from the leader. It came from the trees behind them. The leader jerked backward as if punched in the chest. The flare dropped from his hand, sizzling into the snow. His body slumped sideways. 3 more gunshots followed, rapid, precise. Another attacker collapsed. Then another. Then the man, circling behind them, fell wordlessly into the snow. Ethan froze. Shadow froze. Through the thick snow, a dark figure emerged from the trees, coat flapping, weapon low, breath heavy. A voice Ethan recognized even before the silhouette cleared. "You really didn't plan to start without me, did you?" Ethan exhaled shakily, a laugh breaking through his exhaustion. "Mark Jensen," he muttered. "You crazy bastard." Mark stepped forward, lowering his smoking rifle. "You didn't call at 0600, Mark said, "so I figured I'd come collect your stubborn ass." Shadow bounded toward Mark, tail wagging for the first time in hours, licking his gloves and circling him like a greeting ceremony. Mark scratched Shadow's head. "Good to see you too, soldier." The reinforcements had arrived. The kill team was broken. But the night wasn't over. Not yet. The hearth, the hidden evidence, and the collapse of Titanor. The flames that had devoured the lodge were still smoldering when the helicopters began to land. Snow whipped violently around the clearing as the first aircraft, a Wyoming State Police bird, descended with a roar, kicking up ash, sparks, and half-melted snowflakes. The second helicopter, the darker one, moved like a predator in the sky. It had no official markings, but every agent inside wore the unmistakable armor and steady composure of the FBI's Special Operations Unit. Ethan stood in the snow with Shadow pressed against his leg, both of them exhausted, trembling from cold and adrenaline. The remains of the lodge behind them looked like a blackened rib cage, all that was left of the place he had barely begun to call home. Mark Jensen, rifle still slung, stepped past Ethan and raised his hand slightly as the agents approached. "Friendly, don't shoot, we called you." A dozen beams of tactical flashlights trained on them before lowering. The lead agent stepped forward, calm and controlled even in the chaos. He was tall, clean-cut, with the kind of composure that belonged only to people who had seen far worse and survived it. He extended a hand. "Agent Dana Whitlock, FBI. You must be Ethan Marlow." Ethan shook his hand, his grip firm despite the shaking. Shadow stayed alert but allowed the agent to approach, a sign of deep trust. Whitlock continued. "Your friend in Denver contacted us at exactly 0500. Said you were about to be overrun." Ethan shot a glance at Mark. Mark's smirk was thin, tired, but proud. "You didn't answer at the agreed time," Mark said softly. "So I raised hell." Whitlock gestured behind him. "We scrambled 2 teams immediately. Good thing, by the time we reached the ridgeline, your entire valley was lit up like a funeral pyre." Ethan exhaled slowly. The relief almost buckled his knees. The arrests begin. 2 troopers dragged a wounded mercenary from the snow. Another agent cuffed a second man who had been knocked unconscious. The dead attackers were covered respectfully and tagged. Shadow sniffed each prisoner as they were loaded into the police transport, growling deep when he recognized the scent of the one he tackled earlier. Whitlock turned toward the scorched remains of the lodge. "Blackwood surrendered. He tried claiming you attacked his men first." Ethan snorted. Whitlock continued. "But we found rifle casings from 6 different weapons all pointed toward your cabin, and we intercepted a transmission Blackwood made before landing. Take the evidence, kill the veteran, torch the place if you have to. That's attempted murder on federal land." The relief evaporated from Ethan's face, replaced by something sharper: focus. "Speaking of evidence," he pointed at the lone structure still standing, the stone chimney, blackened, cracked, but unbroken. Whitlock raised a brow. "There's something under there, isn't there?" Ethan nodded. Ridgway hid everything beneath the hearth. Lab reports, soil samples, locations, 15 years of data Titanor tried to bury. Whitlock didn't hesitate. "Show me." The hidden chamber revealed agents formed a perimeter while Ethan walked toward the charred chimney. The heat rising from the remnants stung his skin, but Shadow stayed at his side, tail low, ears alert. The heavy keystone slab was still there, scorched but intact. Ethan crouched, gripping the edge. His muscles screamed in protest, but the slab budged. Mark joined him without prompting, gripping the other side. Together they lifted the stone until it slid aside with a grinding groan, revealing the dark rectangular chamber beneath. Whitlock leaned forward, flashlight cutting through the smoke. Inside, untouched by flame, were the sealed military-grade steel box, the leather-bound field journals, the vials of contaminated water and soil, Ridgway's original topographical map marked in red, the coordinates that aligned with every poisoning site. Whitlock let out a slow, astonished breath. My God, this is enough to bury Titanor for good. Ethan nodded. It's what Ridgway died for. Mark added quietly, and what these bastards tried to kill Ethan for. Whitlock gestured to two agents. They carefully lifted the box and evidence bags out of the chamber, securing them into reinforced cases. The outrage spread's nationwide news teams arrived within hours. Drones, reporters, helicopters hovering above the smoking ruins. The story spread like wildfire. Corporation poisoned entire valley for profit. Senator accused of covering toxic spill. Veteran survives assassination attempt after exposing truth. Families from Silvercrest Valley gathered near the police tape. Some recognized Ethan and approached him with tears in their eyes. A mother said, "My son has been sick for years. Doctors didn't know why. God bless you, both of you." Shadow wagged his tail softly, allowing the woman's trembling hand to stroke his head. Ethan swallowed hard. He wasn't used to gratitude, or being looked at like a savior. Whitlock approached again, tablet in hand. "We've already arrested Sheriff Briggs. 2 county inspectors confessed after we showed them Ridgway's logs. Blackwood's talking, he's terrified, and he's naming names." Ethan looked out at the snow-covered forest, the place where he had almost died twice in 2 days. "What about the cleanup?" Whitlock nodded. "Already authorized. Federal teams are moving in. The valley will heal." For the first time in years, Ethan felt something warm settle in his chest. Purpose, closure. Shadow leaned into his leg, sensing the shift. The past is unearthed. The future begins. Mark walked beside him, the 2 men standing over the blackened ruins of the lodge. "Ridgway wasn't alone," Mark said softly. "He has you now, and federal agents, and a whole valley behind him." Ethan said nothing. He simply looked down at his hands, burned, scraped, shaking, and then at Shadow. Shadow's amber eyes were steady, understanding, unquestioning, loyal. Whitlock approached one last time. "Mr. Marlow, after tonight everything changes." Ethan finally nodded. Everything had changed, and it wasn't over yet. The ashes, the decision, and the bond that built a future. The storm finally broke 3 days later. Sunlight, pale and thin but unmistakably warm, spilled over Silvercrest Valley for the first time since the siege. It touched everything: the skeletal trees, the endless white slopes of untouched snow, and the charred ruin where Ethan's lodge once stood. The lodge looked like the ribcage of a fallen beast. Blackened beams jutted out of the snow like bones. Smoke still curled from the deepest embers, whispering into the morning air. Ethan stood among the ruins, hands in his pockets, Shadow pressed gently against his leg. The wind carried a faint scent of pine sap and thawing earth, a reminder that winter, no matter how brutal, always yielded to something gentler. Ethan inhaled deeply. It smelled like a beginning, not an ending. Shadow lifted his muzzle, sniffed the air, then sat beside him, leaning his full weight into Ethan's hip, an anchor in the silence. The world reacts. 3 weeks had passed since the night of fire. Titanor had collapsed. Executives arrested, Sheriff Briggs in custody, Senator Coleman indicted on federal charges for conspiracy and environmental crimes. Families across Silvercrest Valley flooded social media with stories about illnesses they finally understood. Reporters replayed the footage of FBI helicopters swooping into a blizzard like angels of judgment. The nation was outraged. The valley was relieved. And Ethan Marlow became something he never intended to be, a hero. A quiet one, a reluctant one, but a hero nonetheless. He had refused every interview request, declined every documentary offer, ignored every book deal proposal. He wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in truth, Ridgway's truth, and in honoring the friend he had never met but whose shadow lingered over these mountains. And he was interested in Shadow, the dog who had saved his life more than once, who had found what humans were blind to, who had stayed in the fire until Ethan dragged him out. Shadow was healing well. His singed fur was growing back. His spirits were high. His loyalty unshakable. Ethan scratched behind the dog's ear. "Good boy," he whispered. Shadow closed his eyes, leaning into the touch. Mark returns. A familiar rumble echoed down the mountain road, then a dust-covered jeep rolled into the clearing and stopped. Mark Jensen stepped out, hands in pockets, a grin on his face. He looked older than Ethan remembered, a little more gray in his beard, a little more tired in the lines around his eyes, but the same fierce, stubborn fire burned behind his smile. "You look better than the last time I saw you," Mark said. Ethan smirked. "Last time you saw me, I was nearly on fire." "That's true," Mark admitted, "and your dog was trying to eat one of the attackers." Shadow barked once, proudly, as if confirming the memory. Mark crouched and rubbed his head. "You saved more than Ethan's life, soldier." Shadow wagged his tail. The two men walked side by side toward the ruins. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Mark said softly, "They're calling you a national figure now, the guy who exposed the biggest contamination scandal in the region." Ethan shook his head with a tired laugh. "I'm not a figure, just a man who got stuck in the wrong cabin." Mark nudged him. "You got stuck in Ridgway's story, and you finished it." The future of the valley. Mark pulled his jacket tighter, looking out across the valley. "You know, cleanup crews are calling this one of the largest restorations in the state's history. They're purifying the streams, testing every groundwater pocket. Titan ore's done, and people finally have answers." Ethan didn't smile, but something softened in his expression. "I just didn't want Ridgway to die for nothing." Mark nodded. He didn't. They stood there in silence, staring at the cracked stone chimney, the last intact piece of the lodge. Since the fire, locals had begun leaving small tokens at the site. Thank you notes, crosses, flowers, a small wooden carving of a dog that looked suspiciously like Shadow. Someone even left a hand-painted sign. This place was saved because a dog knew the truth. Ethan had read that one a dozen times. Every time, it hit him harder. The question. Mark already knew the answer to, "So," Mark finally said, "what's next for you?" Ethan shrugged. "Not sure." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Really? After everything? You can go anywhere. Denver, Seattle, back east. You've got job offers from security firms, consulting groups." Ethan cut him off with a small smile. "I'm not leaving." Mark blinked. "You're staying? Here? In these mountains?" Ethan looked down at Shadow, who was lying comfortably in the snow, chin resting on his paws, watching the forest like a silent guardian. Then he looked out at the clearing, the wilderness stretching endlessly in every direction, the whispering pines, the rugged silence. "This place tried to kill me," Ethan said softly. Mark waited. Ethan continued. "But it also gave me back something I thought I'd lost." Mark nodded slowly. "Purpose?" Ethan looked at him. "No. A home." Shadow thumped his tail approvingly. Rebuilding from ashes. Ethan stepped onto the foundation stones of the old lodge. He crouched and placed his palm on the blackened beam. "I'm rebuilding," he said quietly, more to himself than to Mark. Mark smiled beneath his breath. You always were stubborn. Ethan stood. Ridgway fought alone. I won't. And Shadow? Mark asked. Ethan glanced down at his dog. Shadow stood with the slow confidence of a king surveying his territory. He'll supervise, Ethan said. Shadow barked once as if issuing a command. The men laughed. For the first time in months, Ethan felt genuinely light. The final message. Mark turned to leave, pausing beside Shadow. You take care of him, he said to the dog. He's trouble. Shadow nudged Mark's hand, then returned to Ethan's side, sitting tall and proud. Mark climbed into his jeep, waving once as the engine rumbled to life. The jeep disappeared down the trail. Ethan and Shadow stood alone among the ashes. The wind whispered through the pines like a promise. Rebuild, restore, return. Ethan placed a firm hand on Shadow's head. You ready? He whispered. Shadow pressed his forehead against Ethan's thigh in silent answer. Together they turned toward the ruined foundation, not looking at what had been lost, but at what would rise. Because sometimes, the place where danger finds you becomes the place where you finally stop running, and sometimes the home you were searching for is simply the ground where a loyal dog refused to let you fall.